Hi, I'm Jennifer Branch, and thank you for sketching with me today in my garden. It's a beautiful day in spring. The Forsythia is blooming, and we're going to paint it. Let's paint.
Let's paint.
I'm using Arches cold press paper, 140 pounds. You need to use a heavyweight paper if you're just taping it from the back like I did with a white artist tape. Just do a quick little sketch. You don't need to spend a lot of time on the sketch. You just want the basic shapes because you're painting, it's yellow. You're going to use gouache, it's a sketch, but you want to use as little gouache as you need to and only where you want that cool opaque effect, not other places. Just let your brush dance around the paper. Have some fun with this. This is just a happy sketch. You don't have to be stressed. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is just fun. I'm going to layer up the yellows in several different layers. I don't know how many of you saw the Forsythia note cards from last week, but it's going to be the same sort of thing. I'm just doing more of a background with this. Just changing it up, making it a little bit more of a painting. But still, it's outside and we're just having fun, enjoying the scenery. Now, I want a nice dark background to really show up the yellows. It's going to contrast beautifully. I'm just doing a nice bold wash of cobalt blue and quinacridone rust kind of mixed together. There's going to be a little bit warmer in some places, a little bit cooler in some places, and it's going to make a very strong contrast with the Forsythia flowers. I have the warm colors back there. And so the yellow is going to blur into that beautifully. Just noticing spring in the garden. It's a beautiful time of year, isn't it? Nice blues, quin rust. Just get some nice strong darks around the Forsythia and it will make everything pop. Have fun, let your brush dance, really play with this. And you don't have to cover, you're not painting a wall, you don't have to cover everything. I have a few late daffodils still just barely blooming. Okay, so now you see some nice darks, very blued. One trick in painting is to always make sure most of the mixing happens on your paper, not on your palette. That doesn't mean you don't do a couple little puddles of paint. And I definitely think for beginners, keep the puddles separate and have all the mixing happen on your paper. But you don't want any mix to be completely perfect. Then it looks more like an architectural sketch or an illustration. You want some exciting things to happen. You want fun. See, my palette isn't clean, it's not perfect. There's a lot of interesting stuff that just happens. And yes, I will clean it pretty much every time I go out sketching just about, but you don't want it perfect. You want little puddles and the yellows to mix with the browns, to mix with the blues, and then let it dry. When you're painting outside, it's actually pretty easy to let it dry in between. It has time to do that, and the wind blows and the sun beats down and you have to work really, really fast. But the positive is you can have it dry. So take a little of the quin rust, let mix with a little bit of the cobalt blue, maybe a little bit of the ultramarine blue. I still have a really limited palette, so you're not going to get a muddy mess as long as you're not scrubbing it in and trying to make it all perfect. You're going to get some strong darks. It's going to have plenty of time to dry. In fact, you're having to work really fast so that it doesn't dry too fast. And you're going to just let some of the areas be more blue, some of them be more brown, and you know, do plan where your cools are and your warms are, because that's an important part of painting, as long as including your value pattern. But really, you just want the paint to flow together and have a lot of fun with it. If it splatters, don't worry about it. If you know you're not getting the perfect mix on the palette, don't try to get it on the paper. It's going to do some things that surprise you. And notice how dark I'm painting this on. You put it on very dark, and watercolor paint will dry to about half as dark as when you put it on. So go for it. Be bold. So I'm noticing that a lot of the things in the background, you've got the trees back behind there. So I want some vertical shapes. They don't have to be exact trees. If they are, it would look odd. But I want the idea that, yeah, I sketched the Forsythia in my woods, you know, at the edge of my driveway. I know where I am. It gives me a sense of place. Just a few little bright dots of green. It contrasts nicely with the deep browns and grays behind the yellow Forsythia. Most of my yard is still woods. Little flowers at the edges. Okay, I'm using the quinacridone rust with a little bit of the cobalt blue to dull it. And so it's the same thing as the background. You're not going to see too much of it. It's not too much contrast there, and that's all right. It's going to show up enough that you can tell it's there. It gives it a base, but that's all it needs. And it's going to come in and out of the background in wonderful little spiky bits, right? I love using riggers. And so this is using a rigger more properly instead of just using it as a really thin, sloppy paintbrush. And so I'm holding it up at the tip, the little stripe on the back of a rigger. I've got a video on how to use it properly, but the little stripe on the back of the rigger is telling you, hey, hold it way back here. So just let your hands move and play. Some more bright yellows. And remember, I started with the azo yellow. I'm adding more azo yellow, some touches of cadmium yellow, some cadmium yellow with a little bit of the quin rust in it, and all those slightly different yellows. You know, you've got the translucent one, you've got the more opaque cad one, you've got layers in there, and that makes a big difference. Isn't it cute? I love bees. So just layer upon layer of gorgeous, luscious yellows. There's not going to be too much detail in this because there really can't be unless you're going in there with a hair brush, and that is something I'll never do outside. The stamens and everything, they're also yellow. So unless you are just outlining very, very detailed using lots of gouache, it's not going to work. I'm just adding more darks around the Forsythia flowers, and it's going to emphasize this more. Remember, the watercolor dries, half is dark, so go for it. I love fiddleheads. They're so pretty in the woods this time of year. Okay, so you don't want the dark just in kind of one spot. You want to feather it into other areas, and you want to change the colors in it. Have spots, areas be a little bit bluer, areas be a little bit browner, you know, and then just have areas blur off at the edges. You're not painting a wall, you're painting a painting, so you don't have to cover everything. In fact, I would say as a rule of thumb, cover half of what you painted the previous time, each wash you do. So the first wash, you know, you're painting on 70% of the paper, the next you're 35%, like that. I still have those movements, the verticals in the background, and, you know, blurs like the trees in the forest behind me. My azaleas will be blooming in full soon. Some nice bright greens, then the green is a little bit more opaque, so it's going to show up as a light against that on top of the dark. Since they're not the main focus, the leaves, it's just there for a little bit of color, a little bit of contrast. Just showing up a little is enough. You want enough to say, hey, there's some leaves back there. That's it. That does it. A little bit of the quinacridone rust with some of the cadmium yellow, and that makes for a very bright orange. It'll be just that little touch to connect the background and the foreground. Don't be afraid to use some strong opaques on top of transparent watercolor, because the contrast between the opaque watercolor and the translucent watercolor, that's perfect. That's exactly what you want, is that contrast. The very last of the heliobores. Just a few darker lines using the same quin rust with some cad yellow combination. Just enough to kind of define a few of the flower edges, but that's about it, because like I said, unless you were very detailed. Look at the bee. It's not going to, it just is going to look a little forced. We're wanting the idea of spring. Thank you so much for painting with us today.
Enjoy spring and have a happy day.
I hope that there is something beautiful around you to paint today. I hope that this inspires you to paint a little bit and to sketch life's joy. For more inspiration, please visit my website, paintingwatercolor.com. There are a ton of free tutorials and demonstrations and all kinds of painting information online there. And if you have any questions, just ask. If you like this video, please subscribe. That helps me, and I'll do even more of these. I really enjoy painting with you.
Happy painting!
Happy painting!